Once upon a time, rolling down your car window actually meant rolling it down with your arm, and if you were lucky enough to drive stick, you probably felt like a race car driver just pulling out of your driveway. But while features like manual transmissions and crank windows used to be everywhere, they're now relics, quirky reminders of how fast the auto world changes. Today we're diving into car innovations but didn't survive the test of time. And some of these, you'll either miss them like an old friend, or wonder how they ever made it into production in the first place. 11. Full-size spare tires. The full-size spare tire was once a badge of automotive preparedness. From the earliest touring cars to 90s sedans, having a full spare in the trunk was standard practice. It meant you could blow a tire and keep driving for hundreds of miles with no worries. But as fuel economy regulations tightened and trunk space shrank, car makers swapped full-size spares for space-saving donuts. Those tiny temporary wheels that cry if you drive over 50 miles per hour. Some modern cars don't even include a spare at all, betting you'll call roadside assistance instead. It's a gamble, one that leaves old school drivers shaking their heads. 10. Ashtrays and cigarette lighters. Ashtrays and lighters weren't just features, they were essentials. From the 1930s through the early 2000s, nearly every car came equipped with them. Smoking in the car wasn't just common, it was part of the driving culture, especially during the golden age of road trips in the 50s and 60s. The cigarette lighter, which doubled as a power outlet, became a universal plug for everything from phone chargers to air compressors. But as public health campaigns took off and smoking rates dropped, these features slowly vanished. What was once a sign of sophistication turned into a dusty compartment full of pennies and gum wrappers. Now, all that's left is the 12-volt plug, still called a cigarette lighter by some, even if it hasn't lit a cigarette in decades. 9. Corinthian leather. Corinthian leather burst onto the scene in the mid-1970s, made famous by Chrysler and actor Ricardo Montalban's smooth voice in TV commercials.
Yes, even rich Corinthian leather.
It sounded exotic, like it came from ancient Greek royalty, but in reality, it was just standard leather from a plant in Newark, New Jersey. The term Corinthian had no official meaning. It was invented by marketers to add mystique to Chrysler's interiors. Still, the name stuck. It gave buyers a sense of upscale flair, even if the material was no different from the competition. But as consumers became more informed and materials evolved, flashy names without substance started to fall flat. Today, it serves as a cautionary tale of how powerful marketing can be, and how quickly it can wear out. 8. 3-on-the-tree shifters. The 3-on-the-tree shifter first appeared in the late 1930s and quickly became a staple in American cars through the 1950s and 60s. It moved the manual gear shifter from the floor to the steering column, freeing up space for front bench seats and giving passengers more legroom. It was a clever solution for the era, but one that came with a learning curve. Drivers had to navigate a somewhat confusing H pattern using a long lever next to the wheel. It was functional, until the linkages got sloppy or jammed up. Eventually, as floor shifters became more ergonomic and automatics took over, the 3-on-the-tree faded into history. Now it lives on mostly as a punchline or a rite of passage in your grandpa's old pickup. 7. Floor-mounted high-beam switches. The floor-mounted high-beam switch began appearing in cars as early as the 1920s. Located near the driver's left foot, it let you tap your high beams on and off without taking your hands off the wheel. Convenient, as for decades, this was how you signaled, "Get out of my way" on a dark 2-lane road. But as cars evolved and interiors became more complex, the foot switch became less practical. It would often get buried under carpet, jammed with dirt, or triggered accidentally. Automakers eventually moved the control to the steering column, where it could be operated by finger instead of foot. Safer? Definitely, but somehow less satisfying. 6. Rear-facing wagon seats. Rear-facing seats in station wagons first appeared in the 1950s as a clever way to boost passenger capacity without increasing vehicle size. Automakers like Ford and Chevrolet marketed them as family-friendly innovations, perfect for kids and road trips. For many, they became a nostalgic part of growing up, offering a unique view of the world zooming away behind the car. But as crash safety standards evolved, so did our understanding of what happens in a rear-end collision. Rear-facing seats had no headrests, no side protection, and weren't ideal for modern car seats. By the late 90s, they were largely gone, replaced by safer, forward-facing third rows in SUVs and minivans. Still, nothing quite replicates the thrill of making faces at drivers behind you. 5. 2 key systems. Back in the mid-20th century, cars were designed with 2 separate locks, one for the ignition and another for the doors and trunk. The origin of this system dates back to when vehicle theft was less common, and engineers didn't think much about convenience. Brands like General Motors and Ford made it standard practice for decades, but for owners, it meant fumbling through a key ring just to get inside, then again to start the engine. Lose the wrong key and you might be locked out or stranded. As remote keyless entry and central locking systems arrived in the 1990s, the two-key era came to a much-needed end. And now, thanks to smart keys, most drivers don't use a key at all, just a button and a signal. 4. Automatic seat belts. Automatic seat belts emerged in the late 1980s as a stopgap solution to stricter US safety regulations. Manufacturers needed passive restraints, but airbags weren't mandatory yet. The answer? Motorized seat belts that slid into place when you shut the door or turned on the ignition. Toyota, Honda, and GM were among the first to experiment with them. The idea sounded futuristic, but in practice, they were clunky. The motor would sometimes jam, the belt wouldn't retract properly, and you still had to manually buckle the lap belt in most cases, defeating the whole point. Once airbags became standard in the mid-1990s, the auto belt era ended almost overnight. Today, they're remembered more for being annoying than innovative. 3. Car phones, business class, on 4 wheels. Car phones were first introduced in the 1940s for select luxury cars and government officials, but it wasn't until the 1980s that they really caught on with wealthy consumers. Hardwired into vehicles with bulky transceivers and dashboard-mounted handsets, car phones were the ultimate status symbol, especially for executives who needed to be reachable at all times. But as mobile phones got smaller, cheaper, and more reliable, car phones quickly lost their edge. Why be tethered to your car when you could carry a phone in your pocket? By the early 2000s, they had all but disappeared. Today, the only thing left from that era is Bluetooth and the memory of a Lexus with a corded phone built into the center console. 2. Pop-up headlights. Pop-up headlights first appeared on the 1936 Cord 810, but didn't hit their stylistic peak until the 1970s and 80s. Sports cars like the Chevrolet Corvette, Mazda RX-7, and Lamborghini Countach made them iconic. The appeal? Sleek aerodynamics when the lights were off, and a dramatic blink when they rose up at night. But what made them cool also made them fragile. The motors could fail, the linkages could stick, and most importantly, they didn't meet new pedestrian safety standards, especially in Europe and Japan. By the early 2000s, they were gone. Regulations and repair costs finally caught up with the cool factor, but among enthusiasts, they're still missed like a good mixtape or a flip phone. 1. Fender-mounted mirrors. Fender-mounted mirrors date back to the 1950s, particularly in Japanese and British cars. The idea was simple. Placing the mirrors farther forward on the fender gave drivers a wider field of view without needing to turn their heads as much. Iconic models like the Datsun 240Z and Aston Martin DB5 wore them like jewelry, sleek, symmetrical, and undeniably classy. But as cars grew faster and more aerodynamic, door-mounted mirrors became the standard. They reduced wind resistance, met stricter crash standards, and were easier to adjust from inside the cabin. Eventually, fender mirrors became obsolete, phased out by practicality. Still, if you spot one today, it's usually attached to something worth admiring. Why did these features, some useful, some just weird, vanish? The answer: progress, efficiency, safety, and a bit of common sense. But every now and then, you see a crank handle, a 3 on the tree, or a car phone, and feel a little nostalgic. And some of today's high-tech features, giant touchscreens, haptic buttons, digital keys, they might end up in the same graveyard. Because in cars, just like in fashion, what's hot today might be history tomorrow. Which of these features do you actually miss? Let us know below.